Hello everybody, this is Jason Ballet. I am the creator of Guardians of Magic. So I wanted to create this video that talks about Atlantis, the current Earth, and the new Earth. So the current times versus the new Earth and Atlantis. So doing some research for my story for Guardians of Magic, and I've been noticing some similarities between the history of Atlantis, the current Earth, and the new Earth coming. So, and I just want to touch base on those subjects and those topics to bring certain things to light. So, for example, they talked about how Atlantis had free energy, free medical, and then the new Earth that they talk about, there's going to be free energy and free medical, free healthcare, and so on. So I thought that was interesting because they had that technology, those resources back then, and then the new Earth coming, a lot of that technology and resources is going to be available. So going through Edgar Cayce's book, Dolores Cannon's books, and even Tom T. Moore's books, Atlantis and Lemuria, and Dolores Cannon has quite a few books. So, but Convoluted Universe, the first two books talk about Atlantis. So, but Edgar Cayce touches on a few things as well that I thought was pretty interesting when he starts talking about how Atlantis reached the fourth consciousness. Not the whole population of Atlantis, but a certain portion of the population of Atlantis reached the fourth consciousness. And that also is talked about the current Earth and the new Earth, that the fourth dimension and the fifth dimension. So, all right, well, let's begin this. Let's start talking about different things that I'm starting to notice. And the first thing I'm going to try to stick with is Atlantis and versus the current times. So 2018 Earth and so on, as making this this video. First thing that he talks about is that this time of age, and this what made me start thinking about the similarity, is that this time of age, a lot more people from Atlantis is being reincarnated and coming to this Earth at this time that had lives on Atlantis versus any time in the past. So this time now has more people that had past lives in Atlantis. And I'm starting to, going over these books, I'm finding this more and more, that more and more people are having connections to Atlantis or had lives in Atlantis and so on. So next thing, the changing and upgrading of DNA. So Atlantis at that time had the ability to heal their DNA, to change their DNA, and so on. And for us, we're at that same level of gaining more and more knowledge of the DNA, and we're becoming further, more and more advanced, learning DNA. Lifespan. The lifespan in Atlantis at its peak averaged around 100 years. So the average lifespan in Atlantis at that time was around average 100 years at its peak. So, and for us, we're getting closer and closer to that mark, to where we are living longer. And then if you think about the new Earth, we will be living longer on the new Earth with our lifespan. In Atlantis, everyone helped out each other. It was very community friendly, community outreach and so on. Everybody worked together. There's more closeness to it. Now, this goes with two parts with the current Earth, that, you know, if you think about it, on one side we're getting more split apart. You know, political, you know, certain points of view, we're splitting more and more apart. Whereas certain times we come together as a community. So there's somewhat of a comparison with that one. They had advanced technology in Atlantis, so they had advanced weapons of war, anti-gravity, and so on. For the current Earth, we have the nuclear bomb, and atomic bombs and advancements in technology, where we learning more and more of how to control anti-gravity. So when I saw that, I thought that was interesting because Atlantis had that as well. They talk about how they had anti-gravity in these advanced weapons of war. And matter of fact, in Tom T. Moore's book, they talk about how Atlantis had mass destructive weapons that were more stronger, more powerful than our nuclear bombs and atomic bombs today. That they were more advanced on that part. So hopefully we don't continue down that road. And if you read his books, they say that we will not destroy ourselves. So this will not happen again. This is forbidden. And if you think about it, if you check out the news, you have Korea signing those agreements to get rid of their nuclear arsenal and destroy their bombs and so on. So you're starting to see that part come true, and people, getting rid of their mass destructive weapons and so on. So you're starting to see that. So that you kind of see some truth out there in the mainstream media. This was an interesting topic. In Atlantis, they were mixing humans with animals parts, body parts, and DNA. Animals with human parts to make them slaves or robots. So they were using these experiments to have these humans with certain animal parts to make them do chores or to make them do the hard labor that no one else wanted to do. So that's one of the topics that Edgar Cayce talks about in his books. And if you think about it today, what do you see? You see that we're trying to use animals to grow human parts. So animals, you've seen the picture of the rat with a ear stuck on it. You see they're trying to use pigs, I think pigs to grow people's livers and stuff like that. And you can use a pig's liver. And now this was a big no-no for them. They weren't supposed to do that. They're not supposed to mix DNA of animals with humans and vice versa, and using animal parts for human parts. So this was against their rules and the human experiment, as they call it. So this, you mix in the animal kingdom with the human kingdom, and their whole argument was, well, is it a human or is it an animal? Which kingdom do they fall under? So they did not like this. So this was forbidden. And if you think about it, we're going down that same path again. So with our scientists mixing animal parts with human parts and the DNA. So next thing, the Law of One and the Sons of Belial. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but I hear Belial. So, but for current times in Atlantis times, so you had these two groups, the Law of One and then the Sons of Belial. And if you think about it, our current times, you have two political major parties as well. You have the Republicans and the Democrats. So there's so many similarities. So, the Republicans fighting with the Democrats fighting with the Republicans. It was the same story with Atlantis. The Law of One fighting with the Sons of Belial. The corruption. So you have corruption on both sides. You got Democrats that have corruption. You have the Republican members with corruption as well. So the greed and the power. So they all wanted more, and you kind of see this now. Each one's fighting, for that status, that power, and who's on top kind of mentality. and this was one of the downfalls of Atlantis. That Law of One was probably a little bit more peaceful, but they had their flaws as well. So they were corrupt individuals on their side as well, and the Sons of Belial definitely was more corruption. They did more worse things, and matter of fact, they were attacking the Law of One more and more. So, and you kind of see some attacks currently if you think about the Trump elections, where they were sending undercover Democrats into the Trump rallies and so on, and to cause issues and problems, on a different level. Whereas Law of One in Atlantis times, there was battles, so they were sinking people's ships, destroying their aircraft and killing people. So they hated each other, and that's one of the things that hurt them. If they could just get along, they would have never destroyed themselves. So eventually the Law of One and the Sons of Belial destroyed themselves, and that was their downfall. If they could just got along, seen things eye to eye, and put their differences past them, then they would have not destroyed themselves. But each party in those times wanted more power, more control, and so on. So, but before I go any further, I will like to say that politics-wise, with women, that in Atlantis times, they didn't have much women in politics, so that was more for the men, whereas we've done a lot better where we having women mixed into our politics. We have women that are governors, senators. We have women on both sides of the party, Republican, Democrats, so they're into politics. So we coming along way more than what Atlantis did, because women back then in Atlantis times, they say that those things did not happen. So they had a different viewpoint. So women, their viewpoint was take care of the family, stay home, do other jobs, other things, but politics was left up to the men, and that was one of the reasons why there wasn't a balance, and too much of the masculine energy was their downfall. So they didn't have a good balance. So, but I want to point that out politics-wise on that one. Clothing. They say clothing in Atlantis was similar to our modern times of the 1940s. So with the dresses, they didn't have blue jeans. But they did have dresses, shirts, and pants, kind of like what we had in the 1940s and 1920s and so on. So there was some similarities with that. And then certain dresses and clothing of nowadays, but not as much. That wasn't the popular. That was more for the higher class. The rich, more people with more money could afford the nicer dresses and so on. And it's kind of like today, but the average person with these dresses would be considered rich back in those days in Atlantis with similar dresses. So I thought that was interesting that clothing is being repeated as well. So another thing that led me to make this video about that is the similarities with the clothing. So their heels was 2 to 3 inches. They didn't have the long heels that a lot of women have today. They dyed their hair. Same thing how women today dye their hair different colors. Red, blonde, brunette, pink, blue. They did the same thing. They dyed their hair. They said they used a different method, but they would dye their hair as well. I already talked about equality of women, even in the households and in the workforce. Women in the workforce, like large businesses, business owners, that was rare. It did happen in Atlantis, but that was rare back then. So kudos on that, coming, we having more balance. So with the feminine and the masculine energy. So their lifestyles, their home styles, the culture, the family was similar to like our 1920s. I thought this was interesting that they had a different form of birth control and abortions, that our method is more cruel versus their method back in the day with it in Atlantis. So their abortions were more humane and less evasive and so on. So they didn't talk more into details about that, but I would never even thought that Atlantis back then had abortions and their form of birth control, but they did. Another thing that was similar, and one of my long-term questions is money. They paid by cash. They had a checking system similar to us as we use today. They didn't have credit cards or debit cards, from what Tom T. Morris said, and they had cash, and they would write out checks. So very similar to what we're using today. And I mentioned Tom T. Moore, and I'm talking about his information that he put out in his book, and it is Atlantis and Lemuria, and he gets his information from channeling. So he had a past life in Atlantis, and matter of fact, he had many lives in Atlantis, and he's getting his information channeling from a few individuals and so on. So similar to Edgar Cayce. If you're a fan of Edgar Cayce, same thing. He will go into a sleep state, and that's why they call him the sleeping prophet. And he will go to the Akashic records and gather this information. And he had lives in Atlantis and in Egypt. So Dolores Cannon, she did more of hypnosis. So she will put people under hypnosis for past life regression, and they will have it information from Atlantis, from their past lives and so on. And she'll put this information in her books. So, and I'm a big fan of Dolores Cannon. I love her research, her work so much that she offers a class to learn her methods. Her QHHT is her course, and I am level 1 at this moment, and I'm about to be level 2 in a couple of weeks. So, because I'm interested in the past life regression information, and I mean, it's more than just Atlantis. It has Egypt, it has, American Indians, it has people that had past lives in China and Japan and so on, and other planets, other worlds, and so on. So the information that comes out of Dolores Cannon's books is amazing and mind-blowing. So tons and tons of information. And I'm going to have I'll list all her books that I've read on my website of Guardians of Magic, and Edgar Cayce's books if you want to get more information. Same thing with, I'll leave a link to Tom T. Moore's book, which goes into a lot of detail of Atlantis. So, what else we got here? What else? So, that's some of the information I've found so far with the current times of Earth and versus Atlantis. So, let's talk about Atlantis with the new Earth. So, there's a lot of similarities with that. Now, with the new Earth and Atlantis, a lot of stuff, it wasn't the majority of the population of Atlantis. It was certain sections of the population of Atlantis versus the new Earth, as I'm finding. It wasn't the whole, I guess, country or continent of Atlantis. It was certain sections, whereas the more advanced they were was the parts that were, you seen the similarities of the new Earth and Atlantis. Now, Atlantis did have, from what they say, different tribes. All they did was work on a farm, and they didn't live in the city. They just lived in the mountains and out there in the plains. those were different from the ones that were practiced in the temples, and the priests and had access to a lot of this crystalline technology and so on. So, and a lot of their technology was crystalline based. Based on crystals, they can energize crystals, and that's where they got their free energy from, their free medical. If anybody was sick, you just walked into one of the healing temples and you stayed there for so many hours, and when you left, you was fully healed. Reading some of the information that's out there with the New Earth that they talk about, that our DNA would be more crystalline, and that has been said in the past with Atlantis, that their population their DNA was getting more advanced, and it was becoming more crystalline. So it's just a shame that they destroyed themselves. So a certain part of the population with Atlantis had fourth density, fourth consciousness, and with the New Earth, we're going to have a higher dimension as well. So we're going to be part of the fourth and the fifth dimension for the New Earth that they're talking about. On the New Earth, there's going to be free energy, and I've already stated that they have free energy. Now, I don't know if the New Earth is going to have free energy based on crystals or some other type of energy, but evidently there's three or four different types of energy sources out there. So Lemuria had their source of energy that they use that is different from Atlantis and what we use today. Atlantis had theirs. Theirs was based on crystals. And then there's the other technologies that are more alien and what they use on other planets. Medical. So the New Earth, medical treatment, medical costs, and so on will totally change. So on the New Earth, they said that they'll have these healing temples as well, but these devices would heal you. And if you think about Atlantis, what they say is that they had these crystals that could heal you. So they use light, and on the New Earth they talk about light, that we will have more information of using light to heal and different colors to heal. Same thing with Atlantis. They knew how to use these certain lights and certain sound waves to heal. So Atlantis, you will walk into this chamber, a crystal chamber, and this room, it could be yellow, red, each room had its own color, and it was based off of a different type of crystal. And depending on what you had wrong, you would just walk in, and you'd be guided into these certain rooms that had these light colors for your healing. So for the New Earth, it's very similar for what they're saying, that they'll have these devices that will scan you with this light, or give you this certain sound information to heal whatever issues you might have, whether it's DNA, genetics, diseases. And speaking of diseases, in Atlantis was very few cases of people dying from certain diseases because they had the cures. They knew how to solve those problems. And for the New Earth, diseases will be the thing of the past, that we will live longer, we will not die from diseases. So I thought that was interesting and mind-blowing. Traveling, they talk about for the New Earth, there's going to be easier ways to travel. So I don't know the details of how that's going to work, but pretty much you can just, if you want to go to another state, another country, and so on, you will get there. Now, if you're part of the fifth dimension, that makes more sense. But the fourth dimension, that was one area I would like more information about. Is, if you're part of the fourth dimension, how would you travel? Fifth dimension, you more energy. So lifespans. So on the New Earth, you can live as long as you want, as they're saying. And Atlantis was different. You couldn't live as long as you want, but the priest knew how to live for hundreds of years. So the average lifespan of these priests that had knowledge of their lifespans were around 200 years. So, and that's what they talk about in these books. So, but for the New Earth, from what I'm gathering, is you can live as long as you want because you're going to be more energy based. So, weather. Atlantis could control the weather. In these current times, we're learning a little bit more and more about how to control our weather. But in the future, on the New Earth, we'll have that technology and that know-how how to control the weather. So that should be interesting, especially with me living in the South with hurricanes and so on. And Hurricane Katrina, that's one of the things that Atlantis could do. They could control hurricanes. So they had their type of hurricanes and tropical storms and so on. So, and they could use their technology to lessen the blow, control it better. But another thing I want to point out is that hurricanes, I was reading, Tom T. Moore's book. In his book, he was saying that hurricanes is a way of the Earth releasing negative energy. So it's needed, and the reason why it's needed is to release the negative energy of that mankind is putting onto the Earth and so on. So Atlantis could use crystals to transfer knowledge and information. Now I've heard of information about the New Earth where they could use crystals to communicate and transfer their knowledge, their information, and so on. So and that's one of the things that they'll use. They say in the New Earth that they could use these crystals to talk to people or communicate with people that are of the fourth dimension or even still in the third dimension. So in Atlantis, they had a lot of this information. Now, I don't know if this is the same type of crystal technology, but I thought that was interesting as well as a similarity. So that's pretty much all I have for today. I'm going to come out with more videos that talk about Atlantis, Guardians of Magic, and so on. So there's going to be other information coming out. So please subscribe. Please help me grow this channel. If you know someone that would think this is pretty cool with the New Earth and Atlantis and current times, if they can relate to this or like see like, oh yeah, I have a similarity as well. I'm starting to notice. Leave it in the comments. So comment below on this video and say, yes, another similarity that I know is this. So as I do more and more research and trying to gather more information for Guardians of Magic, I'm starting to see a lot of information that's repeating itself. So, and I think history does repeat, and I'm starting to see this as well. So just want to say thank you for listening, and please subscribe. And if anything you could do to help me grow this channel, I appreciate it. Thank you.